Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. It's time to get back into some monitor testing. I'm amassing a bit of a backlog here at the office, so I thought I'd kick things off by testing the MSI MPG341CQR. This is a display that I saw at Computex and it really caught my eye for a number of reasons. It's a 34-inch ultrawide at 3440 by 1440, which I love, but it hits 144Hz with a VA panel and does so for an MSRP of $899 US when it launches globally next month. This isn't the first monitor that does 3440 by 1440 at 144Hz. We've already seen that from LG's 34GK950F, but MSI's offering is a little different. It's a VA panel instead of IPS, and crucially it costs $300 less than LG's $1,200 asking price. The 34GK950F does occasionally go on sale at below $1,000, but I haven't seen one for a while, and in general LG's monitor is a bit hard to find. So I think it's safe to say that generally this MSI option will be cheaper and offers a higher refresh rate than popular 120Hz monitors like the Alienware AW3418DW or the Acer Predator X34P for around the same price. So it could be a great value for what it's offering. Let's kick things off by, you guessed it, looking at the design. MSI's optics range tends to be more geared towards the gamer end of the spectrum. It doesn't go as crazy as, say, an Asus ROG monitor, but it's similar to the Aces of the world. On the rear, you'll find a mishmash of different plastic finishes. There's glossy and matte sections, a large RGB strip for all those cool effects you won't see in regular operation. I mean, it's a fine design. I personally prefer a more minimalist look, but at least it's well constructed and doesn't feel cheap. The stand has taken some inspiration from Asus with a copper-colored section that joins the stand legs to the pillar. The legs are a sturdy metal and take up less space than some other ultra-wide designs I've seen. With height, tilt, and swivel adjustability built in, it's a good stand overall and is extremely sturdy with very little wobble. From the front, you'll notice MSI's signature RGB LED bars, which can be used for simple effects like this rainbow, or for some in-game information like health and ammo through syncing with Mystic Light and SteelSeries GameSense. For normal operation, I find the RGB lights a bit distracting, but for some gamers they might find the functionality useful, and at least it's somewhat innovative and isn't just hiding the RGB lights on the rear where no one will ever see it. For inputs, we have two HDMI 2.0 ports, DisplayPort 1.4, and a USB-C input that operates via DP Alt mode. There's also a 3-port USB hub and some audio jacks, so a decent range of connectivity. For the on-screen display, there are two ways to control the monitor's features. You can use the directional toggle on the back of the monitor, always nice to see that, or you can hook up the monitor via USB and use MSI's gaming OSD application. Basically, all of the features can be controlled through here, like the screen assistance crosshair cheats, the refresh rate info, color settings, backlight strobing, anti-motion blur modes, and more. It's a good range of features and functionality, but as far as this stuff is concerned, it's pretty similar to many competitors. I do like the inclusion of a macro key on the bottom left corner of the monitor though, which can be mapped to a function or setting. Haven't really seen that before. You might have also spotted the camera in the middle of the bottom bezel. This is another innovative inclusion by MSI. I guess you have to applaud them at least for thinking outside the box a little with some of these features. The camera can operate as a basic low quality webcam, but MSI has added in some additional functionality as well. You can use the camera for automatic brightness adjustment, which is neat and works well if you don't want to mess around with changing the brightness level. I found it set a good level of brightness for the ambient light in my office. The other feature is it can use facial detection to set a bunch of settings depending on who sits in front of the monitor. So for example, if multiple people use the same PC and monitor, but like different monitor setups, the camera can detect who is sitting there and make the adjustments automatically. Now this does sound cool, and in my testing it worked fine, but I just don't think it's all that useful. Most monitor settings are set and forget or really aren't that important to change. Others like cheat crosshairs you're probably going to enable based on what you're doing, not who specifically is in front of the monitor. Having this functionality seems pretty niche and isn't really a big selling point in my opinion. Also included in the box is a mouse bungee and a webcam or camera mount, both neat in the box freebies, and the camera mount in particular could be useful for streamer types. I don't think the monitor would be all that much cheaper without these additions, so no problem with MSI trying to add value in this way. It's again a bit of out of the box thinking I think is pretty neat. Enough about this stuff, let's get into some performance numbers, and we'll start with the refresh rate here. The MPG341CQR clocks in with a maximum refresh rate of 144Hz, and it supports FreeSync that works with both AMD and Nvidia cards. We're also getting low frame rate compensation here, so the effective minimum refresh is 1Hz, and that's all good if standard signs. Across the ultrawide monitor market, 144Hz seems to be coming in and replacing the spot that 120Hz held among high-end 3440 by 1440 1040 monitors. So you're getting a 44% increase to refresh rate over entry-level 100Hz panels, and that's quite a significant difference if you play up in the high end of that refresh rate. I can definitely tell the difference in smoothness, and to me, it's a more worthwhile upgrade over 100Hz than 120Hz was. However, those with 120Hz panels aren't going to rush out and buy a display that's only 17% faster, and that's not a huge enough difference to be noticeable. The question with most VA panels is, can the display actually transition fast enough to support this refresh rate? For 144Hz, the refresh window is 6.94 milliseconds, so we need most transitions to be faster than that to get a true 144Hz experience. And I'm happy to say that on average, the gray-to-gray transition time was 4.57 milliseconds, with around 90% of all transitions falling within the refresh window. So in general, this panel is comfortably suitable for 144Hz gaming. While I did test with the fastest response time setting, there is still some dark level smearing, which is common for VA panels but is unwanted. It's not the worst smearing I've measured, but transition times around 20 to 25 milliseconds for the worst of the bunch isn't amazing. However, to get the overall average down to below 5 milliseconds, there are plenty of transitions around 3 milliseconds, so this VA panel in general is fast, but it's also quite inconsistent. This is in contrast to the LG 34GK950F, which also does 144Hz. It's a slower monitor overall with a gray-to-gray average of 6.09 milliseconds. However, there are no dark level smearing issues, and the variance between transitions is much narrower. As an IPS panel, the 34GK950F can suffer from its own issues like glow and backlight bleed, so it just depends what you're after. As for MSI's claims that the MPG341CQR has a 1 millisecond response time, that's not really true from a gray-to-gray average perspective, but the monitor does have a backlight strobing mode, so it probably refers to that. Input lag was also good at around 3.5 milliseconds. It's within the standard range for gaming monitors, so no issues here. Brightness is an interesting situation. MSI claims 400 nits of brightness, but I only achieved a touch under 300 nits. Anything around this level is still fine. Most people will use the monitor in the 100 to 200 nit range, but I was a little surprised at MSI's spec sheet. Same story for the contrast ratio. MSI claims 3000 to 1, but in my testing it was more like 2100 to 1. 3000 to 1 tends to be the standard VA contrast ratio, so maybe MSI just filled that in here. But it's quite common, as you can see from the chart, for ultrawide VAs to clock in more around 2000 to 1 natively. When comparing to the LG 34GK950F, brightness is similar, but contrast is one area where the VA panel is superior. In fact, despite only posting a 2100 to 1 contrast ratio, this is twice as good as LG's IPS panel, and with lower black levels, it will deliver better shadow performance in dark rooms. Color performance is also an interesting battle between the MSI and LG monitors. LG's Nano IPS panel is produced to a wide gamut with 95% DCI-P3 coverage in my testing. MSI is using a VA panel here, which is claimed to be 105% sRGB or 84% DCI-P3, so a bit above sRGB, but not really a true wide gamut panel. I achieved 83% DCI-P3 in my testing, so pretty close to MSI specs, but really this isn't good enough for wide gamut. It's more just providing a slight oversaturation to sRGB most of the time. However, for gaming monitors, delivering sRGB and not worrying about wide gamut often delivers a better experience, given most games are sRGB in an SDR mode. This is true here. MSI's factory calibration for the MPG341CQR is pretty decent. They targeted a sub 2.0 delta E average and largely got it. In grayscale, the monitor does have somewhat of a red tint to whites, but gamma performance is decent, and overall, we're still sitting a delta E average of just 1.77. Saturation performance is interesting in that while the monitor does exceed sRGB at the top end, mid-tones, especially for reds and blues, are actually slightly undersaturated. So we get a delta E average of 2.35 here. Color checker as well sits right on that delta E average of 2.0, which is very good for a gaming monitor out of the box, and certainly much better than others in this class. In fact, out of the box performance for MSI's monitor is better than LG's. The 34GK950F had a few issues with its sRGB mode and tinting out of the box, which led to higher delta E averages when comparing against sRGB. LG's monitor does have an advantage when calibrated and is better for wide gamut professional work, for example, but for your average gamer that won't calibrate the display, MSI delivers a better default experience. Now, I did mention that my MPG341CQR came with a slight red tint that can be corrected through a few OSD tweaks, and then the results do improve. Delta E averages tighten up to below 2.0 across the board, and the mid-tone saturation issue improves somewhat. A full calibration does take things up another notch to be even better, so that's always an option for those with calibration hardware, and as always, the results are very accurate there. The ICC profile we created for this monitor is available for our Patreons to download. As for uniformity, the MPG341CQR is average in this regard. The central zone isn't particularly uniform, but it isn't terrible either. This is the standard sort of result you get from a curved VA ultrawide. In contrast, LG's IPS panel in the 34GK950F is more uniform and has better viewing angles, so if those things matter to you, the LG option is better. I'll touch briefly on HDR here to round out the testing. The MPG341CQR is advertised as being Display HDR 400 certified, but as you can see from the checklist, it's plainly not an HDR capable monitor. Brightness is too low, there's no local dimming, so there is no high dynamic range aspect to the display's contrast, and the color space isn't large enough for proper wide gamut support, so it fails all three pillars of HDR. You might be wondering, well, this monitor only does around 300 nits of brightness, so how did it pass Display HDR 400 certification? Doesn't that require 400 nits? Well, MSI told me the settings they use for testing, and it involves setting the monitor to 100 contrast among other things, which is not color accurate and in some situations is pretty unusable. Under these settings, I got within 5% of 400 nits, so it technically passes certification, but in real world usage with practical settings, it's a fair way off. Not that I think this is a big deal in general, given that most Display HDR 400 monitors really aren't HDR capable to begin with. So as always, you've seen a bunch of data, and I think overall the MSI MPG341CQR is a pretty decent display. It doesn't revolutionize the ultrawide gaming monitor market, it's mostly just incremental steps forward here, but there are some aspects that are better than average, and for some buyers I think that will be enough to satisfy. The two things MSI really delivers on here are the refresh rate and the out-of-the-box colors. Yes, there's a bit of dark level smearing here, but for the majority of transitions, the MPG341CQR is fast and comfortably able to transition to keep up with a 144Hz refresh rate. Color performance out of the box is pretty close to a Delta E average of 2.0, which is well above average for a gaming monitor and means it just looks great without needing many tweaks. On top of that, we can add in a bunch of bonuses. MSI has a good array of OSD features, there's a few extra bits and bobs thrown in the box, the monitor has a great build quality, the RGB lighting might be useful to some people, the contrast ratio is decent if a little low, and input lag is very good. When you add all those things together, MSI is delivering a great gaming experience with this monitor. The main issues to me are things that are largely inherent to using this sort of VA panel. Dark level smearing is one, another is weak uniformity, and a lack of proper wide gamut support. MSI were also a bit overzealous with their spec sheet. The monitor underperforms a little compared to what they list, and HDR performance is non-existent, but I do think for gamers those two things really don't matter all that much. The big question is whether you should buy the MPG341CQR or go for LG's 34GK950F, both 144Hz options. A lot of this will come down to price. MSI's offering going on the MSRP is 25% cheaper, and considering many of the differences are not crucial for gamers, it will be a much better option and the one I'd choose in most circumstances. But there are some things the LG model does better. It lacks dark level smearing issues, although it's slower overall. It has better uniformity, viewing angles, and wide gamut support, but isn't as well factory calibrated. It has slightly better brightness. Both options, despite being advertised as HDR 400 monitors, really don't deliver an HDR experience, so neither is better for HDR gaming. Don't get me wrong, both are great monitors, but given the pros and cons, I'd swing towards the MSI monitor for those that will be primarily gaming and just want a high quality fast ultrawide. If you do a bit of content creation as well as gaming, I think that's where I'd opt for the LG monitor if you have the extra money to spend, although honestly the MPG341CQR is still a good option given its calibration and lower price. As is the case with high-end ultrawides, I should point out that if you don't specifically want or need 144Hz, there are some great budget options these days. 100Hz displays like the MSI MAG341CQ are just $430 US, which is under half the price of the MPG341CQR. The high refresh models have better panels overall and are more future-proof options, but I still feel $900 is a bit too expensive here. Yes, MSI's monitor is the best value out there, and I would definitely buy it over slightly cheaper 120Hz monitors if you want a high refresh ultrawide, but it's definitely expensive compared to entry-level options. I think the sweet spot here will be around the $600 to $700 mark. Hopefully the price of these panels will filter down to a point where that sort of pricing is viable. That's it for this review of the MSI Optics MPG341CQR. This monitor should hit the market in the next few weeks. I think it's slated for August in the United States. and it's definitely one to look out for if you're interested in a high-end ultra-wide with a high refresh rate. I think it's quite good. Subscribe for more monitor reviews. Consider supporting us on Patreon. I'll catch you in the next one.